If you agree that real heroes often walk among us unnoticed until the world finally pays attention, make sure to like and subscribe, because this story is about a moment when a young woman in her late 20s nearly got dragged out in shame, until the truth stopped everyone cold. It didn't begin with applause or speeches. No. Her day began in the back corner of a crowded hall where the city's leaders gathered to honor community service, a phrase that usually meant awards for wealthy donors or well-connected figures, not for people like her. She stood quietly, arms folded, almost trying to disappear into the crowd, when a ripple of whispers started near the front. To most onlookers, she looked out of place. A simple blouse, scuffed shoes, hair pulled back hurriedly, not the polished elegance the room expected. People noticed. They always did. And soon enough, security noticed too. What the audience couldn't see was the storm that built inside her, because this wasn't her first time being misunderstood, not by a long shot. She had promised herself she would stay invisible, that she wouldn't interrupt, but as the speeches went on and the mayor's staff spoke about safety improvements and community resilience, she shifted on her feet, her jaw tightening, her fingers tapping against her wrist. She knew things they didn't, details that gnawed at her conscience, because only weeks earlier she had stood face to face with danger that could have ended dozens of lives. But no one in this room knew that, not yet. To them, she was just another restless young woman without a seat at the table, and that was enough for two guards in stiff suits to begin their slow approach. It started with a glance between them, then the measured walk across the carpeted floor, the kind of movement meant to look casual but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. Their eyes fixed on her, scanning her as if she were a problem to be removed rather than a guest with a story. And here's the irony. She didn't even want to be there. She had debated skipping it altogether, but something tugged at her, some stubborn need to see with her own eyes how the city would talk about resilience, while forgetting who had truly stood in the fire. When the guards reached her side, one leaned in, voice low but sharp. "Ma'am, you need to come with us." Heads turned in her direction. Murmurs started. People love a scene, especially when they can judge from a distance. She tried to explain, to whisper that she had a reason for standing here, but they didn't listen. One hand closed around her arm, firm, rehearsed, practiced. The crowd parted as they began to move her toward the exit. And in those seconds, humiliation burned hotter than memory. Was this what it meant? That even after what she had done, she was nothing but a disruption? To the rest of the hall, she looked like a troublemaker escorted out to restore order, not a woman who had once spotted danger where no one else did. The whispering sharpened. Who is she? Why is she here? Unbelievable, ruining his ceremony. Every word sank deeper, and yet she stayed silent. She didn't fight, didn't shout. She just let herself be guided, jaw tight, eyes fixed forward. And just when the double doors loomed, when her shoulders sagged under the weight of rejection, something happened that no one expected. The microphone squealed for a moment as the mayor, standing behind the podium, raised his hand suddenly and barked across the hall. "Stop." The sound cracked through the murmurs like thunder, freezing the guards in place. The crowd went silent. Every eye turned, and the woman in her late 20s, still held between two broad-shouldered men, lifted her gaze in confusion. The mayor's face, once warm with practiced smiles, now carried a look of urgency, recognition, and something else, respect. And in that instant, the story changed. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but the same people who had judged her seconds ago would soon learn who she really was, and why her being there was not an intrusion, but the very reason any of them were alive to applaud it all. That was how it began, not with honor or banners, but with humiliation, misunderstanding, and a grip on her arm that nearly dragged her away before the truth could ever be told. The mayor's voice cracked across the room, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The guards stiffened mid-step, their hands still on her arms, unsure whether to follow through or let go. The silence in the hall was thick, charged, and all eyes were on the woman who had just seconds ago been dismissed as nothing more than a disruption. She stood there in her late 20s, bewildered, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, her heart hammering against her ribs as if it wanted to escape before the truth spilled out. The mayor stepped down from the podium, his shoes echoing sharply on the polished floor, and pointed directly at her. "Release her," he said, The kind of command that carried the weight of authority not up for debate. The guards hesitated, clearly caught between the protocol drilled into them and the sudden shift in command. One of them muttered, "Sir, she was," but the mayor cut him off. "Do you know who that is? Without her, none of us would even be standing here." A murmur swept through the crowd, sharp intakes of breath, confused whispers, startled glances bouncing from face to face. The guards loosened their grips reluctantly, and she staggered slightly as the weight of their hold disappeared. She rubbed her arms, the sting of shame still present, but more so, the bewilderment that the mayor even knew her name, let alone her story. He turned to the audience, his voice rising with emotion that seemed to ripple through the walls. "You sit here today, enjoying this celebration, congratulating one another, completely unaware that just weeks ago your lives hung in the balance. And the reason you're here, the reason we can call ourselves safe, is standing right in front of you." He gestured toward her, and gasps ran through the hall. The applause hadn't started yet. Instead, there was only stunned silence, the kind of silence that demanded an explanation. And so, the mayor gave one. He told them about that night 3 weeks earlier, when the city's East End Community Center was filled with families for a weekend festival. Hundreds of people crammed inside for games, food, laughter, music. No one noticed the faint smell in the air, or the subtle vibration underfoot, the things most dismissed as quirks of an old building. But she noticed. She had been standing near the back, a volunteer helping guide children to the activity tables, when she caught the acrid scent and felt the strange warmth on the floorboards beneath her shoes. Her instincts screamed at her that something was wrong. Most people would have shrugged it off, convinced themselves it was nothing, but she wasn't like most people. She had grown up with a father who worked construction, who drilled into her the dangers of gas lines and weak wiring, who once told her, "If something doesn't feel right, you listen. You listen, because hesitation kills." That night, those words returned like a spark. She had rushed toward the staff, begging them to shut off the building's main power and call for an evacuation. At first, they laughed nervously, brushing her off as an overreacting young woman. But she pressed harder, louder, frantic enough to catch the attention of a few parents. When the building's custodian finally investigated, what he found confirmed her fears. A gas leak, slow but deadly, building pressure beneath the old structure. Worse, faulty wiring nearby had already begun to spark intermittently. It was a disaster waiting to happen, a fuse set to ignite at any second. She didn't wait for someone else to take the lead. She raised her voice, herding families out, pushing past hesitation, grabbing children by the hand, and leading them toward the doors. And then, just minutes after the last group had cleared the building, an explosion ripped through the community center, sending fire and debris into the night sky. Dozens would have died if not for her stubborn insistence, her refusal to stay silent when others doubted her. As the mayor recounted the story, she felt her throat tighten. She hadn't told anyone the full details. She hadn't wanted the attention, hadn't wanted to replay the panic that had etched itself into her memory. To her, she had done what anyone should have done. But the mayor wasn't exaggerating. She had saved lives, dozens of them. The audience sat spellbound, and for the first time, those who had muttered against her just minutes ago now stared at her with wide eyes, their judgment cracking beneath the weight of the truth. Some even looked ashamed, realizing how quickly they had dismissed her as nothing but a nuisance. The mayor's voice softened now as he turned fully toward her. "You didn't ask for recognition. You didn't demand praise. You simply acted when no one else did. And because of you, children went home to their parents. Families remained whole, and our city was spared tragedy." He gestured to the guards who had tried to escort her out, and yet we almost made the mistake of casting her aside. How many times, I wonder, do we overlook the very people who keep us safe because they don't look the way we expect our heroes to look? The guards shifted uncomfortably, their faces flushed. One of them dropped his gaze, ashamed. She stood there, unsure whether to cry or to speak, her hands trembling at her sides. And then, something unexpected happened. A woman from the crowd, a mother whose children had been inside that community center, rose to her feet. Tears glistened on her cheeks as she clapped, slow at first, deliberate, each clap echoing through the silence. Others followed. Soon the room was filled with applause that swelled into a roar, people standing, clapping, cheering, some even crying. It wasn't polite applause, the kind you give out of obligation. It was raw, emotional, full of gratitude that words couldn't carry. She blinked, overwhelmed, her face hot with tears she hadn't meant to shed. The mayor moved closer, descending the last steps, and walking directly toward her. The applause surged as he stopped in front of her and extended his hand. She hesitated, still trembling, still caught between disbelief and humility. Slowly, she placed her hand in his, and the mayor raised her arm high for the entire room to see. "This," he declared, his voice booming with conviction, "is what a hero looks like." The applause grew louder still, rattling the very walls, and for the first time since that terrifying night, she allowed herself to breathe. Yet even as the recognition washed over her, she couldn't shake the memories. The smell of gas, the sound of children crying, the rush of pushing people through doors, the thunder of the explosion that rattled her bones. Those memories clung to her, sharp and heavy, and she knew they always would. But standing there, hearing the mayor's words, she realized something else. Those memories weren't just hers to bear. They were proof of the lives saved, proof that fear hadn't paralyzed her, proof that sometimes the least expected person could alter the fate of a city. The guard stepped back fully now, sheepish and silent, and she glanced at them with no malice, only a quiet sadness. They had only seen her surface, the scuffed shoes, the tired face, the restless shifting, and had made their judgment. And in a way, so had she, always believing that people like her were destined to go unseen, unacknowledged. But the mayor's voice carried over the crowd, reminding everyone, including her, that silence doesn't erase truth, and humility doesn't erase heroism. As the applause finally ebbed, the mayor leaned closer, speaking low so only she could hear. "I know you didn't want this, but they need to see it. They need to know." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she whispered back, "I just did what had to be done." The mayor nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "And that's why it matters." The rest of the ceremony changed after that. The names of donors and polished figures still filled the program, but every mention seemed hollow compared to the raw gratitude directed at her. People approached her after, offering thanks, hugs, handshakes, some even apologizing for their earlier judgment. She nodded politely, still dazed, still trying to absorb the shift from near humiliation to celebration. And as she stood there, the mayor announced that a special honor would be given at the closing of the event, not for wealth, not for politics, but for bravery. Her name, once whispered in judgment, now echoed in admiration, carried on every grateful voice in the hall. And though she had never wanted recognition, never sought applause, the truth was undeniable. She had saved lives, and no one could take that away. The hall still buzzed with the thunder of applause, but as the echoes began to fade, what remained was a hush that felt almost reverent. She stood at the center of it all, a woman in her late 20s who hours earlier had considered slipping in and out of the ceremony unnoticed. Now, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressed down on her, not in suspicion this time, but in awe. The mayor didn't return to the podium immediately. Instead, he stayed by her side, giving her a grounding presence she hadn't realized she needed. "You've carried this story alone long enough," he told her quietly, but the words struck like a bell ringing through her chest. It was true. Since that night at the community center, she had replayed every second in silence, never once considering she might be called a hero. She still didn't feel like one. She remembered the fear, the shaking in her knees, the helplessness that crept up her spine as she screamed for people to move faster. Heroes didn't feel fear, she thought. Heroes didn't cry themselves to sleep afterward. And yet, as she glanced around, the faces of strangers told her something different. That courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. The mayor finally guided her back to the podium, and this time, the microphone was lowered not for him, but for her. Her pulse roared in her ears. Public speaking had never been her strength, and now a room full of officials, families, and dignitaries expected her to say something profound. She cleared her throat, her voice unsteady at first. I didn't do anything special," she began, the honesty cutting through the tension. "I just noticed something, and when I tried to tell people, they didn't listen, so I shouted louder. That's all." The crowd hung on her words. Some nodded, some smiled through tears, But no one dismissed her now. She glanced down, gripping the podium tighter. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. But when you're standing there, and you realize people might die if you stay quiet, you don't think. You just move. Her words trailed off, fragile but piercing. And then, unexpectedly, the same mother who had started the applause earlier called out from the crowd. That's exactly what bravery is. The hall erupted once more in cheers. The mayor lifted a small box from the podium, a city commendation, hastily prepared after sleepless nights of deliberation with his staff. He opened it and revealed a medal gleaming under the lights. It wasn't military-issued or gilded with prestige. It was simple, but in that moment, it felt weightier than gold. On behalf of this city, the mayor announced, "We honor you for the lives you saved and the reminder you've given us that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they're ordinary people who refuse to ignore the warning signs." He pinned the medal to her blouse, his hands steady and respectful. She stood rigid, overwhelmed, her eyes blurring with tears. She tried to blink away. The medal was cool against her chest, its presence both alien and grounding. She had never worn anything like it, never expected to. As the event wound down, people formed a line to meet her. Children hugged her legs, parents shook her hand, elders blessed her softly. Each interaction blurred into the next, leaving her dizzy, humbled, and oddly drained. She caught the eyes of the security guards who had tried to remove her. One of them approached, awkward and hesitant. "Ma'am," he said quietly, we're sorry. We didn't know." She studied him for a moment, then offered a tired but genuine smile. "It's okay. Most people don't." Her answer wasn't bitter, just truthful. They nodded, grateful for her grace, and stepped aside. When the ceremony finally ended and the crowd thinned, she found herself alone near the stage, staring at the medal glinting in the low light. She traced its edge with her fingers, her thoughts drifting back to the night of the explosion. The sound, the heat, the chaos, it would never leave her. Recognition didn't erase the scars inside, but maybe, just maybe, it gave them meaning. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see the mayor again. "I know this attention is uncomfortable," he said, "but the story needed to be told. You've reminded us that ordinary eyes see what experts sometimes miss, and that courage doesn't come from titles. It comes from heart." She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping. "I don't feel like a hero." The mayor shook his head. "The best ones never do." That night, as she finally stepped outside into the cool air, the city lights glittered across the skyline. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. The whispers of judgment from earlier had been replaced by voices of gratitude, and though she knew tomorrow would bring back the quiet life she was used to, she also knew something had changed. She had been seen, truly seen, not for her clothes, or her silence, or her mistakes, but for the choice she made when it mattered most. And as she walked down the steps, metal pressing gently against her chest, she realized something she hadn't before. Sometimes you don't choose to be a hero. Sometimes the moment chooses you, and the only thing that matters is whether you answer. And she had. And because of that, dozens of families still had the chance to hug their loved ones goodnight. And for her, that was more than enough.